Welcome. I'm Larry Olsen, and this is the Brain Vault Podcast. Did you know that the thoughts you're thinking right now are shaping the life you'll live tomorrow? Well, in this podcast, we just don't talk about mindset. We decode the blueprint behind behavior, performance, and possibility. This is where science meets real-world strategy, and your brain stops running on autopilot. If you're ready to turn default thinking into intentional living, you're in the right place. What happens when a physician who's treated over 170,000 patients steps back and realizes we've been solving the wrong problem? Today on the Brain Vault, where science meets success, I sit down with Dr. Kenneth Ro, a double board certified ER doctor with 35 plus years on the front lines of healthcare, who saw something most never do. Men weren't just breaking down physically. They were losing their identity, their edge, and their sense of purpose. So he built a different path. Through his Reclaim method and his book Prime, How to Win the Second Half of Life, Dr. Ro is helping high-performing men rebuild not just their health, but their clarity, confidence, and mission for the second half of life. This conversation isn't about optimization. It's about truth and what it really takes to get back in the game. I want to welcome, and I'm so excited to have today, this doctor who is going to allow us all the opportunity to kind of rethink so many things that we've all taken for granted. So welcome, Dr. Ro, to the Brain Vault Podcast.
Thank you very much, Larry. Pleasure to be here.
We're very excited. I've had the opportunity to meet this guy before, and I just want you all to recognize that whatever you're doing right now, make sure your focus is only on what you're hearing and what you're watching. And be careful about attempting to multitask, because remember, the brain fails miserably at that. It can only focus on one thing at a time, and we want your focus to be on this if you hope to be able to walk away with a whole new perspective. And here's my first question to open things up, Dr. Ro. At what point does a man stop responding to pressure like fuel and start responding to it like friction? And why do most never realize when the shift happens, and how do you create the awareness necessary to create the awareness from transformation?
Well, I think the answer to that is it's a very gradual change and very gradual evolution, right? It's very insidious. I mean, we're used to, as men in particular, middle age, our body changes, our mind changes, our energy changes, and life changes, right? I mean, you take on more responsibility. I call it the Triple Caretaker Effect. You're taking care of kids, you're taking care of your parents, a lot of times, and then also you're supposed to be taking care of yourself, and that's supposed to be something that is strongly biased towards taking care of yourself. Put the oxygen mask on first, take care of yourself, so you can be a better caretaker. But usually pressures, you kind of invert that. You're taking care of your kids, you're worried about them, you're worried about your parents, you're concerned about your career and retirement, income, living costs, education, a lot of things. So a lot of things also take away from really caring for yourself. And some of it really boils down to, as a man, you get on this trajectory, right? I mean, you stay in your lane and you're comfortable with what's normal for you. And a lot of that involves key performance indicators or success or money or being a good provider. And a lot of it doesn't reflect the ability to look outside of yourself and really have some insight and say, where am I if I have these buckets, which we'll say include relationships, health, spiritual, um, success and money, however you wanna measure that, you know, where am I full in some aspects of my life, and where am I a little bit running on empty? And, I think as a man going through midlife, it really takes, a timeout and, some awareness to say, "Who am I really evolving into as far as a lot of these other aspects in life?" And if you take it a step further, you start realizing that it's the relationship that really strengthens your success. It's if you look at these areas in your life as more of a scaffolding, they're really allowing you to elevate in other aspects of your life. But I mean, I will say a lot of us men, I'll include myself because I've been part of this journey myself. And this is why I reach out to other men. You get on the success ladder, and you're doing very well. But Stephen Covey stated it very nicely. If you're climbing the ladder, make sure the ladder's up against the correct wall.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
a lot of times, and that wall changes. It's
Mhm.
not the same wall that it might have been when you were 20, 30, 40, but you don't recognize that. All you're recognizing is climbing.
Hmm.
You don't take enough time to kind of look around and say, what am I climbing? And
Yeah.
is it leading me to what I really want to be? And that is an aware person who understands that there are a lot of aspects of life that define success, and that success is multifactorial. And there is a difference between success and fulfillment. And, we talk about mission. Our discussion is going to be less cliche because that's when I mean, when I listen to a lot of podcasts, I will turn my mind off when I hear about mission statements and finding your purpose because, you know, I don't know, it creates a lot of guilt in a lot of people, and it's not very well defined. So I'm gonna try to I'm not gonna say those, grand words anymore in this podcast, but I wanna be more practical. I wanna say, "All right, if we don't wanna if there's a fire, we don't wanna just address the smoke. We wanna address
Mhm.
the fire."
Mhm.
So that's kinda my gist when anytime I talk to somebody or anytime I do a podcast, certainly my interactions with you, that's the sort of conversation that I wanna have.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate that because I think one of the most important things we do in communication in whatever relationship we're in is being real careful of the words that we use. Because those words trigger pictures, those pictures create emotion, and then emotion causes action. And if that word confronts you, like what's your sense of purpose? And nothing comes to mind. Um, it like you said, you could feel guilt, and then we kinda turn away from that. We protect ourselves. We go back into our hole, our safe space. And this is what I wanted to bring up. You're talking about this thing about self-care. You mentioned that men are taking care of so many facets and assets in their life. They're also, I have found, accused of being more on the narcissistic side, only because, they'll go out and golf. They'll spend 5 hours away from everything. So needless to say, they must not care about their family. Um, and yet this is supposedly an opportunity for them to do some self-care, where the only real objective is just to get this little inanimate object from one place to another. And when we're brought up, the only time we really get into self-care is in a physical education class. And it's brief, and it's not reiterated, and it's unless we choose it as a profession, as you have, to really find out more about what this body needs, we're all programmed from our own parents, which is where basically our parenting model came from. From the leaders we had in business is where our leadership model came from. I wanted to talk to you about these mirror neurons that we have, which is a real shortcut to growth. All we got to do is watch somebody else do it, and then we can learn how to do it. And it's really efficient in adaptation. But then when we get to this point of midlife, And whatever sex we are, whatever situation we're in, these are where some of these questions come up. And some of these questions are, what am I doing? And why am I doing it? And not the why about, purpose and all of this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to really self-examine a little bit, and this is what I'm excited about having you on, is what if I've attached who I am to what I do? And then all of a sudden, what I do starts to transition or doesn't fulfill like it used to. What have you found takes place in your work? Because I love the term reclaim. That is so empowering. But what is it I'm reclaiming? Because nobody wants to start over. At least that's another turn off, right? Start over. That sounds like a lot of work. What have you found is this element that comes into this sense of my own identity? And if I transform too much, I'll lose it. And up to this point, it's the only thing I could have counted on.
What a terrific conversation. So many touch points there that we can
Good.
discuss. Of course, I'll address it in a global sense first, and then we'll
Okay.
kind of dial it down and unpack it.
Beautiful.
What I want men and women to know is that for men, in particular, that we're talking about right now, you know, there's a cultural bias against the midlife crisis. You know,
Hmm.
it's a crisis. Somebody had a nervous breakdown. Um, but what I contend is that there's a midlife inflection point, a natural midlife evolution. Things are going to change. I mean, a crisis is identified by consequences.
Mhm.
If the consequence is that someone is not going to address something, someone's going to be the strong silent type, we're just going to allow things to happen to us. And at the same time, physically and cognitively, we're going to allow the floor and the ceiling just to drop down and decline little by little, year after year.
Hmm.
That's something that can't happen. So that's a cultural, that's a mindset, that's a growth mindset where we say, what I always say is aging is inevitable, but decline is optional.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So we need to be able to manage, fight, evolve with the idea of aging equals decline. Now,
Hmm.
what the neuroscience shows, because I know you're very heavy in the neuroscience, is that we have neuroplasticity. We have the capacity to increase our, in particular, our crystallized intelligence. That is pattern recognition, wisdom, using our lived experience to be able to have perspective and understand as we get older. You know, that is we need to rename that into we're getting better. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
in a lot of different ways, we are getting better. We tend to focus on the decline. I mean, we tend to focus on the energy. I'm not able to do what I used to do. I'm not 20 years old anymore. But I think the beauty of it is we're allowed every day, we're allowed to live one more day and we're allowed to get better in so many different ways.
Hmm.
But I think culturally we tag things to physical performance or maybe even an energetic feeling, or disease states, unfortunately.
And that mindset of the culture adaptation, of how much culture plays. We're not in a culture here in the United States that values age. We're a very young culture. We're a very fast moving culture. We're a culture that bores quickly. We've got to have something new, to support consumerism, and I get all that. But there's something that ends up missing, and we start to diminish our sense of value, regardless of how successful we may be, how much money we may have, and value comes from a multitude of things, as you and I have discussed. But when we get into this, how do we go ahead and convince ourselves? and I really feel like there has to be some form of intervention here. What we're doing right now, I think, is a real wonderful form of intervention. Gives people a chance to ask themselves some questions without somebody pointing the finger at them, telling them how they should live, what they should believe, and all of these things that our society is really good at. So, you, of all people, when you talk about consequences, and a lot of us, our amygdala jumps right in, protects us, and doesn't allow us to really find out what we're capable of. And here it is. Imagine you as an ER doctor and an ambulance comes in. There's been an accident and you hear a little bit about it from the aides and you say, "I don't want to work on that. I'm uncomfortable with that." The last time I dealt with that, what has happened with you and your frame of reference that you attack things? You face everything and recover, which we think is really where power comes when you become fearful. What have you found that you can share with us that kept you in the game under the worst circumstances?
I think a lot of that just has to do with, my overall philosophy on life. As
Okay.
I c as an ER doctor over 35 years, I've seen a lot of death. I've seen a lot of tragedy. I've seen a lot of heartbreak. And, what keeps me moving is just what you talked about earlier about the mirror neurons.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
when you talk about the difference between, empathy, sympathy, and compassion, you know, compassion is being able to see something and see someone suffering and have the action to do something about it.
Hmm.
So, when I really broke it down and understood what compassion was and is, I finally realized that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here on this earth, to help people in their worst time of need. And so that really keeps me going to where it's like it's a selfless issue. A lot of it also is training, but as you hone your skills, you get better. Things kind of evolve too in emergency medicine.
Hmm.
That burning desire to alleviate suffering, to really help someone. That's really what kept me going through all the long shifts, through the sleep deprivation, through the traveling, through everything that I saw. It was like, the more you see, the more you want to help.
Hmm.
And it was to the point where, if you insulate yourself, I think a lot of that too. COVID's been a big game changer, right? We
Hmm.
insulated ourselves as a society. We shrank our world down because we didn't want to get exposed. And unfortunately, a lot of that same mindset has permeated
Hmm.
after COVID. We're waiting for the next epidemic, or, you know, there's a lot of things that happen with technology, AI, and social media. Now we're connected in other ways rather than face to face, and that rich amount of person to person, face to face interaction that you just can't replicate online.
Hmm.
So we're missing a lot of that. And you touched
Yeah.
upon it culturally as well. Other cultures kind of really, really admire the person as they get older. As a source
Hmm.
of wisdom, and
Hmm.
in our ever-changing, quick technological, kind of quick dog eat dog world, that's really changed. And I, it's tough to really predict the future as well, because you're going to have AI replacing jobs. It already has, and
Hmm.
so the younger generation, they're really there's a lot of fear about being replaced. We already see that in a lot of different fields, and so that's a different level of stress, different level that people have to deal with.
Let's talk about that for a sec. That old adage, that which I feared most has come upon me.
Hmm.
The whole man, this is neuroplasticity in play. Neuroplasticity, in its simplest sense, is the ability to create new habits, attitudes, beliefs, and expectations on purpose. Or we can let the evidence that we experience as we go through life determine those habits, attitudes, beliefs, and expectations. You talked about something innate. You talked about compassion, and I'm really a believer that's in innate. You know, if you look at 9/11, that just showed the hearts, the camaraderie, the ability to come to the party in the most difficult times and support one another. In any you look at any war, you look at any calamity that a nobody can really kind of blame the neighbor on, 'cause the neighbor's in the same thing we're caught up in. And so we are this compassionate human being, but yet some of us have stifled it. Some of us have allowed the element of suspicion, the element of skepticism, the element of blame, the element of judgment, all these things that protect us from actually becoming who we were capable of when we popped out of the womb. And the reason I'm so excited to have you on is because you did something about it. And I'm not saying we all didn't do something about it. What I am asking is, did you sense when you look back on your life and now you've had the wisdom to kind of articulate your philosophy and your identity, when you look back on your life, did you see yourself as a compassionate young man? Did you see that in grade school? Did you witness that as you were growing up? And what caused you to then be motivated to pursue the academia and the other skill sets that you developed for yourself so you could do something about it?
I think that happened as a young child. I was big brother. I mean, 2 younger brothers.
Okay.
You know, I had a
Wow.
strong sense of, justice and injustice. I grew up around a lot of, trauma, bullying. I write about it in my book, and
Okay.
my past history. So, a lot of racial stuff too.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, I grew up with that. Oh, at first it wasn't compassion necessarily, it was survival. You
Mm,
know, it
mhm,
was
mhm,
just flat out trying to get through the day and, process and understand why people didn't like me because or
mm.
I perceive people hated me that because of, my race.
Yeah.
Uh, so
The
that took a while to
comments that you were
process.
getting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
as I got older, it was morphed into something else. It was morphed into saying, well, look at injustice, and widen your scope about that. You know, people are sick, they have disease, they need help. They don't know who to turn to, and they're going to turn to you. You want them to turn to you. So you want to sharpen and hone your skills and your knowledge to really be able to help people. So after, just like anything else, Maslow's hierarchy, right? We have to
Mhm.
be safe.
Yeah.
That, and then we always have to come back to that. And you know, there are times where I haven't through my life, I really haven't felt safe, but I was able to kinda circumvent that to be able to serve
Mm.
others.
Beautiful.
Over
Beautiful.
time, that does kind of cause an erosion on the inside because that causes stress, that causes, a cortisol drip, as you would like to say,
Yeah.
that if you need to recover from that, um, you know, you need to recover from that so you can just be able to handle it. But yeah, that's kind of the crux of where I came from. I mean, I wouldn't label it as pure compassion to begin with, but it evolved into compassion as I felt more safe in my own body.
Wow. Wow. That's very inspiring. I love the definition of inspire, which is to breathe spirit in.
Mm.
And y you do that to me. And I would imagine anybody listening is feeling the same thing. And the reason for that is getting back to the work that you do. And what happens when this identity starts to put into jeopardy? That I'm getting older now, that I'm not as meaningful now, that maybe I'm not as relevant now. AI is coming on, there's all kinds of elements that outperform me or could. Where does your work come into play to tether somebody, to get them grounded again so that they can, because this is something I know that a lot of people are going through that are listening to this. It's just natural. And 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 yet if it's not done properly, it can only create pulling a blanket over our head and just waiting for AI to take over, or whatever alien element out there that we're fearful is going to create a third world war, or whatever that fear may be. Share with us what you've been doing that addresses that.
I think the big thing to address right off the bat is to have a man understand that this is the natural course of things,
Mhm.
to normalize this this conundrum that every man's going to go through, every person's going to go through. But my work focuses on men because that's the journey that I've taken,
Gotcha.
and you know, I- to
It's
keep
not
it
exclusive of.
exactly, to
Yeah.
bring it out of the shadows.
Yeah.
Too many times our default is to be silent about it, not talk about it.
You bet.
I wrote in one of my articles that, and we talked about this before, the biggest risk factor in health is not blood pressure, it's not cholesterol, it's silence. Because when I see
Mm.
that in the ER, who do I see in the ER? I see guys that have not seen their doctors. They've blown off their symptoms. They've let it come to a head to where it becomes a heart attack or a stroke or something tragic. And we need to change that trajectory. That's
Hmm.
kind of what led me to do this work. I stopped
Okay.
seeing patients as diagnoses. I started seeing patients as, what was this person like 10 years ago
Mhm.
as a past self? Was there something we could have done to intervene? Or was there some information or some knowledge that he or she needed to know, that would have prevented this tragic event from happening? And that's where my focus really shifted, Larry. I mean, this was 25 years into me being an ER doctor,
Mhm.
where I
Mhm.
started asking these questions,
Hmm.
and that's what
So it
really.
really shifted from,
Yes.
when this happens, you do this. When that happens, you do that. Kind of like how you train a pilot. You don't train a pilot how to crash. You train them that if this happens, do that. So there really isn't any chance for error based on not reacting.
That is
Um,
absolutely
correct?
right.
And after a while, you're just a reactor. And I can see where the aha came when you're going, well, how do we keep this from me getting to the point where I have to react now, typically when it's too late?
And what I would see, Larry, is I would just see the change it would make in the person and the family member,
Okay.
the impact that this tragedy would, or this consequence of, just not knowing, just not doing, not understanding. It was just an unforced error. But we're
Mhm.
talking about an unforced error about your life, about your health, and it might be about your life, but not only impacting you, but everybody around you. And so when I started looking at that more in a more global sense, that's when I started really saying, what else can I do?
Hmm.
What else can I
Hmm.
really do to promote health, to promote vitality, to prevent these tragic endings from happening or consequences? So I started seeing kids. When I would see kids in the ER, normally it's could be a fracture, could be a cold and a flu. But then I started looking at them also in kind of a different light.
Hmm.
How about the health of your parents or your
Oh,
grandparents? Kids need the family unit. So, is your mom and dad, they would come in with them. How healthy are they? So I really started looking at health from a very compassionate, wider lens. And I think that's what really motivated me to take this next step.
man. Wow. Wow. When they say we could live forever if we stayed hydrated, kept the cortisol drip at a minimum, and stopped processed foods. And, that's like easier said than done when all our choices, there's probably 3% of our choices are healthy for us in any grocery store. And yet here's another thing that I'm really curious about. You could have created a lot of pushback. You could have created a lot of defensiveness. Um, we eat healthy, we right? We'll have a fruit now and then and a vegetable, and so everything is about presentation, right? So how do you assist someone on such a delicate topic as identity? Because I know you deal with that, and keep their attention without them getting defensive. Share with us, because these people that are listening, they want to have more abundance in their lives. They want to be healthier. There's no question about that. But I'm a firm believer that you can't tell anyone into high performance. So how do you allow them? What opportunities do you create for them to create their own aha moment where real transformation can occur, not just temporary change?
I think one of the big keys is vulnerability. If you're able to be vulnerable yourself, tell your own story, then people
Mhm.
will naturally open up and gravitate to you.
Ah,
If you're walled up and armored and, creating an image that, hey, I went through this process and I've become successful, then you're just creating guilt and shame.
yeah, beautiful.
Larry, guys are just they're just waiting for people to connect. They're just waiting for other guys to connect with them. And we just don't do that in this society. I mean, we want to put up a strong machismo front, right? I mean,
Right. Never let them see
weakness
us sweat.
is
Yeah.
not to be encouraged. I mean, we're men, we just want to dismiss things and we don't want to talk about it. So, to kind of change that dynamic, all my guys that I meet one on one, you know, uh, they've found me. It wasn't like I
Mm,
found them in a grocery store randomly.
right.
But I mean, that's a good thing. And
Yeah.
I can tell you, Larry, it's very interesting when you look at the kind of the psychology and the time frame. It's not about, hey, I saw what you wrote, this article, I saw you on a podcast, and I'm really interested and I want to get to know you better. It's typically it's very interesting. The time frame is maybe 3, 6, 9, 12 months. I've been doing this now for about a year. And, typically I always curious. I'm like, well, how did you find out about me?
Mm,
Well, doctor, I've been following you, for about 9 months. And, it just, you build up that trust.
mm,
Guys, it's very funny. You think we're more, off the cuff, that we're spontaneous. When it comes to something like vulnerability, that could be further from the truth. There is no spontaneity there. That's
yeah.
something that has to be processed, thought about, and you really have to gain somebody's trust, and without face-to-face time, but what you write, how you present yourself, and so I've found that extremely interesting. I came into it saying, I'm pretty a spontaneous person. I like to be very intuitive. That's that helps me in the ER. But
There's a lot of neurons in the gut.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. I'm very much rely on my gut instinct. My dad
Sure.
was the same way, or is the same way. So, but it's very interesting. Guys are very logical, calculating, particularly when it comes to their health. But I think a lot of times, to answer your question, it's like there isn't that push to begin with because they've already sought me. But
Yeah.
for your audience, if there's already kind of a wall or resistance or an obstacle, I would just say, something, we're all in the same boat. I mean, Woody Allen would say, one of his funny quotes was, "We're all clowns on the same bus trying to get to the same place." And it's like, yeah, to a certain extent, I have to agree with that one. Um, but just to kind of, I wanna say, normalize it. Normalize the
Yeah.
ambiguity, normalize the uncertainty, normalize the fears, because that's what we're all going through, but we're not bringing it out in the open. We're not
Yeah.
discussing it.
Yeah.
We're not having a conversation in a nice, productive, pragmatic way, and that's what needs to change. But it
Yeah.
doesn't take much, but I would say, again, the key is gonna be vulnerability,
Yeah.
about
It, you
myself,
know, it,
about yourself, and I think that's what opens up doors.
yeah. Wow. That's so powerful. It caused me to think about, in the work that I do with leaders, is whenever we get transparent or we start to get deep, there's always somebody in the room with tremendously low self-esteem, and their response is sarcasm.
Mhm.
Their response is lash out. The response is to bully. And it's interesting that that's what sometimes vulnerability can create in others is this defensive posture that they feel like the house of cards will fall if they open up. And they've lived off of this false sense of who they are for so long that if they actually open up, it could all tumble down instead of it could all surpass their wildest expectations as to what's possible for them. And you have such a gift in just your presence. Just your presence is inviting. And this is why I asked that question about, did you see yourself as a little guy, you know, who was compassionate? And yet you've really triggered something too for our listeners and for all of us is this whole thing about never let them see us sweat, always feel like you got to have all the right answers, is such a false sense of what real strength comes from. And so I wanted to allow you the opportunity right now because unfortunately, there's only so many of those sand particles in the glass. Um, is to share with those that are kind of leaning like, well, wait a minute. I thought my identity was pretty strong, and we're not saying it's not strong. We're saying is it providing you with joy and the kind of life that you want to be able to feel good about and contribute to? What would you share with them that might allow them to kind of ask the right question?
Well, let me give you a an example that's really made a difference in my life. Um, when I did research, one of the people I admired, from afar, was Mother Teresa. I was just like, so, in the '90s, you got this little woman that can show up in New York, and Mayor Giuliani was just like, you know something, the littlest person in the world, and everybody was like, "Oh, well, okay, stand attention. This woman is an icon. You better listen to what she says." And when I studied her life, um, it was quite apparent that Mother Teresa had, and to her, as she admitted in her vulnerable moments, as she always was, she's an open book, very transparent. She essentially described how she had what I would feel is the worst case of imposter syndrome of almost anybody that I've studied or I've done research on.
Wow.
So you look on the outside and you say, Mother Teresa has imposter syndrome? There is no way that that could actually happen. That's paradoxically absolutely untrue because she has an unkeen faith. You talk about somebody that you can be drawn to. But if you study her prayers and you study some of her, autobiography, she constantly fought with the feeling that she was not good enough, that she
Mm,
was not worthy of her stature, in the world, which I
right.
just found very profound. I
Yeah.
just said, "You know something? If Mother Teresa felt imposter syndrome, then on what level is your imposter syndrome just not even in comparison, um, perspective wise?" So I was just like, that's a universal issue.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
I think I brought this up in one of our previous conversations. Adam Grant wrote a book, um, and in 2021 and also in 2024. He addressed imposter syndrome. And it wasn't just like, well, everybody has it, we should get used to it. It's okay
Mm.
to feel this way because we all feel this way. He actually identified it as a sign of humility and as a
Wow.
sign for growth. Because instead of being a narcissist and thinking that you're just everything you do is just great, you are able to have some insight and say, well, you know something, um, there's room to grow. Whatever
Mm.
I do, whatever I accomplish, even though over time I kind of discount how much I have to work to get here, uh, it's there's always a chance to refine and get better. And so imposter syndrome, therefore, uh, doesn't become doesn't have a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
We can reframe it to have a positive connotation because you have introspection. You're thinking about things. You know you're not perfect. You're trying to get better. So when I think about that and I tag humility with it, it really opened up some. Actually, the book was Think Again. Was the
Yeah.
title,
Adam Grant.
and it really changed my world and how I interacted with myself, because I did
Hmm.
have a huge case of imposter syndrome. But hey, if Mother Teresa can have it, I think it's okay if you have it too.
You're in good company.
Yeah,
Yeah, oh my golly, I tell you, you just open up one thought, one question after another. Very much appreciate this. I want to give you the opportunity because we need to wrap this up and share with people how they find out more about you, how they connect with you. Um, they may be driving right now or whatever, but what would your suggestion be for them to get a hold of you and share the name of your book again and everything else?
sure. So my central website is my name, www.kennethromd.com.
And
But
Row
there
is RO,
It's
correct?
RO, correct.
Okay.
So keep it save your typing. It's short.
It's not row,
Uh,
row, row your boat.
exactly.
Yeah.
My book is called Prime: How to Win the Second Half of Life. That's on Amazon. That's under Ken Ro MD because I like people. The Kenneth sounds more formal, but I like my friends call me Ken. Everybody calls me
Okay.
Ken.
All right.
I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so you can find my
Okay.
profile with a search on LinkedIn. I answer all my DMs myself, and that's a very active platform for me.
Yeah. Good for
But
you,
yeah,
by the way.
those are kind of the main ways to get a hold of me.
All right. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for tuning in to what we have to offer. And I want you all to recognize that whatever you're going through is a really great opportunity for you to not only ask yourself, do I want to continue to go through this? But more importantly, what can I learn from this? Especially if it happens to be something that may be a little irritating, something that may cause you to have to now react a little differently than what you've become used to. And all of this can be really channeled into this whole opportunity for you to show up a totally elevated version of yourself. And I would highly recommend that one of your first steps is to get Ken's book because Dr. Rowe is a living testament to not just talking it, but as that old verbiage, walking the talk. And I think that speaks more highly of anyone than the greatest title or whatever attributes others can place on them.
Hmm.
He's the real deal. And he's been there, done that, and he's continuing to do it. And he's experiencing new things. And he's constantly being challenged himself to really take a look at the perseverance of a Mother Teresa, yet the humility of the whole concept of having that imposter syndrome. We're all in this thing together. And from what I understand, nobody gets out of it alive. We're all going to find out what's ahead. But in the meantime, there's 1 in 400 trillion chances of being alive. And here we are with
Mhm.
ears to be able to listen, with eyes to be able to see, and with a mouth to be able to share. Not so much about what you've done, but what can you do for those of around you who are looking for that lift up. And you have lifted us all up. And I will call you Ken if you don't mind. Um, and I want to thank you for your time and the investment that you've made with all of us on the Brain Vault podcast.
Thank you very much, Larry. It's been my distinct pleasure.